Hello and welcome to another tutorial video, this one covering inductive and deductive reasoning. This is the second video in a three-part series designed to help students prepare for the claims and reasoning retest. Please remember that when watching this video you may pause or rewind the video at any time to take notes or review what you have learned. In this video we're going to cover how to identify reasoning, what deductive reasoning is and looks like, what inductive reasoning is and what it looks like, and then finally how to differentiate between deductive and inductive reasoning. So let's start off by identifying reasoning. When you are trying to determine what type of reasoning is being used, you must first find the claim, then find the support used to prove the claim, and then look at how the claim is justified by the support. Look at the relationship between the two. If you can't identify the claim in an argument, you can't identify the reasoning. Okay, so make sure that you know exactly what the argument is claiming first. Otherwise, you can't go any further. Let's talk about deductive reasoning. Deductive reasoning is a method of drawing conclusions from given premises. You have a claim that is supported by general principles. The syllogistic model calls these principles the major and minor premises. The Toulmin model calls these principles the support and the warrant. These premises can be claims themselves or facts. If the premises are true, this is how deductive reasoning works, if the premises are true and the claim follows logically from the assumptions, then that claim is considered to be sound. And if a claim follows logically from the premises, it is undisputable. You cannot dispute this claim. You can, however, dispute the truth of the premises. This is where the strength of deductive reasoning lies, is that if your claim follows logically from the premises, if the conclusion you have drawn follows good logic, then it is undisputable. And the only thing that can be disputed is the premises you've used to get there. Let's take a look at some examples. This first one comes from the last exam you took. It says, a healthy democracy depends on the participation of citizens, and that participation is learned behavior. It doesn't just happen. Civic learning, or educating students for democracy, needs to be on par with other academic subjects. So this is deductive reasoning. We have a claim. The claim is actually the last sentence in here, that in order to have a healthy democracy, students need to be educated on democracy. The major premise is the first sentence, that a healthy democracy depends on the participation of its citizens. And then our warrant or minor premise is actually stated here. Our warrant is that this participation is learned behavior. It must be learned. People aren't just born with it. So if our major and minor premise, or our support and warrant, are true, then our claim is indisputably logical. The only dispute we can really take with this argument is whether or not the major premise is true, because the major premise is a claim in and of itself. Look at that. A healthy democracy depends on the participation of its citizens. Someone could potentially argue against that. The minor premise, this participation is learned behavior. Someone, I guess, could potentially argue against that. So that's one of the things about deductive reasoning, is that if it's disputable, you're disputing the premises, the support used to arrive at the claim, and not the claim itself. So this argument, as I said, is deductive because the claim is a conclusion that is drawn from general principles regarding democracy and education. The claim follows logically from those two premises. If the premises are true, remember that claim is 100% sound. Here, the author's claim cannot be disputed, only the premises. The claim about the health of a democracy, depending on students' knowledge of a democracy, it follows logically from the premises, so it cannot be disputed. However, the premise that citizen participation makes a democracy healthy can be disputed, and the premise that democratic participation must be learned could also be disputed. That is what makes this deductive reasoning. The structure, that general premise to specific conclusion, and also the fact that you can dispute the premises but not the logic of the conclusion. Let's take a look at another example. Children deserve to hear that their beliefs and those of their community are respected in the classroom. If a community believes very strongly that creationism should be taught alongside evolution, then school boards should be able to establish a curriculum that teaches creationism as well as evolution. So here we have in this argument a claim and kind of a hypothetical scenario. This, if a community believes very strongly, if some hypothetical community believes very strongly in such and such, then this should happen. So the claim is this last sentence: school boards should be able to establish a curriculum that teaches creationism as well as evolution. Our major premise is that this hypothetical community believes very strongly that creationism should be taught alongside evolution. And our warrant or minor premise is that children deserve to hear that the beliefs of their community are respected in the classroom. Remember, that warrant or minor premise is just the logical statement that makes the major premise support the claim. This particular argument is also deductive, and it's because the claim is a conclusion drawn from general principles regarding community beliefs and educational policy. The claim about what a school board should be allowed to do follows logically from the two premises. If the premises are true, then the claim is sound. Here, the author's claim cannot be disputed. That's why it's deductive reasoning. Only the premises can be disputed. The claim about what school boards should be allowed to do, it follows logically from those two premises. So it itself cannot be disputed. However, the premise that the two premises can be. The premise that a hypothetical community believes something, well, that's not really a claim, that cannot be disputed. However, this is where a lot of people would get hung up. The premise that children deserve to hear that their community's beliefs are respected, that could be disputed. Some would say that there are more universal standards that take precedence over any smaller community's beliefs, that sort of thing. So that is another example of how deductive reasoning works. It works in such a way that if the premises are true, you can't dispute the claim, but you can still dispute whether or not the premises are true. Let's talk about inductive reasoning. Inductive reasoning is a method of drawing inferences based on observation. The claim in an inductive argument is supported by empirical evidence. That's just another word for observed evidence or observable data. Empirical evidence must be observed, either firsthand or otherwise. So it's something that has happened or is happening that is observed. If the evidence is sufficient, relevant, and accurate, then the claim is considered reasonable. An inductive argument is disputed when the evidence is insufficient, irrelevant, or inaccurate, or when the claim is worded in such a way that it makes the evidence insufficient, irrelevant, or inaccurate. An inductive conclusion can only ever be reasonable. That is, any claim you make based on inductive reasoning can only ever be reasonable. It can never be absolute like a deductive claim. Let's take a look at an example. Another one from your test. Two-thirds of 12th graders scored below proficient on the last National Civics Assessment in 1998, and only 9% could list 2 ways a democracy benefits from citizen participation. Yes, young people remain highly patriotic, and many volunteer in their communities, but most are largely disconnected from current events and issues. So our claim here is that last sentence. Most students are largely disconnected from current events and issues. Our empirical evidence was the two-thirds of 12th graders scored below proficient, etc., and only 9% could list 2 ways a democracy benefits, etc. That is my observed data that supports the claim I make at the end. This argument is considered inductive because the claim is a reasonable inference that has been drawn from observation, observable data. This claim is reasonable based on the evidence I have provided and based on the way I've worded the claim. The statistics on test scores and polls are sufficient enough to support the idea that most students are disconnected from current events and issues. Without that word most, perhaps the evidence wouldn't have been sufficient. The statistics that I provide are also relevant to the claim being made, and the statistics are accurate in this case, but should be cited if this were an actual essay or article. I should always cite my evidence to avoid any kind of potential dispute. All right. Let's take a look at another example. In recent years, civic learning has been pushed aside. Until the 1960s, courses in civics and government were common in American high schools. Today, those courses like civics and problems of democracy are very rare. Once again, I have a claim. In recent years, civic learning has been, quote, pushed aside. Okay, it's my claim. And my empirical evidence is this. Until the 1960s, these courses were common, but nowadays these courses are very rare. Okay, that's an observation I've made, and it reasonably supports the claim that in recent years civic learning has been pushed aside. This argument is inductive because the claim is a reasonable inference that has been drawn from observation. The claim is reasonable based on the evidence given and the wording that I've used with the claim. The observations from before the 1960s and nowadays are sufficient enough to support the idea that these courses are in fact being pushed aside by something. We don't know what, we don't care what, that's outside the scope of the argument. The observations are also relevant to the claim that's being made, and the observations are accurate in this case. But once again, I should always back up this sort of evidence with some sort of statistical data to avoid any kind of dispute. But for the sake of the argument, let's just say these are accurate. So let's take a look at the differences between deduction and induction side by side before we do a little practice. Deductive reasoning draws conclusions from given premises, while inductive reasoning makes inferences from observed observation, or observed evidence rather. Deductive reasoning, in deductive reasoning, your claim is supported by general principles, while in inductive reasoning, your claim is supported by empirical evidence. In deductive reasoning, your claim is considered sound when the premises are true and when the claim follows logically from them. In inductive reasoning, your claim is considered reasonable when the evidence is sufficient, relevant, and accurate. In deductive reasoning, if the claim follows logically from the premises, the claim cannot be disputed. Only the premises can be disputed. In inductive reasoning, the claim can be disputed when the evidence is insufficient, irrelevant, or inaccurate in its support. In deductive reasoning, the logic often relies on an unstated assumption, like the warrant or the minor premise, which can be stated but is more often unstated. In inductive reasoning, your logic often relies on an inductive leap from evidence to inference. That is the gap between what I know and what I'm inferring based on what I know. Finally, in deductive reasoning is used to prove certainty, while inductive reasoning can only ever prove reasonableness, not certainty. Let's take a look at a couple for practice. A solid foundation in the liberal arts is essential because it trains the mind in critical and analytical thinking. Okay, let's see. This is actually deductive reasoning. Mainly because what should have tipped you off is there's no observations in here. There's no observable data. You see, the support is a general principle, not a specific observation. The support is that, training in the liberal arts trains the mind in critical and analytical thinking. The claim about the essentialness of liberal arts education is supported by the premise that it trains the mind in critical and analytical thinking. And here we have, in this example, an unspoken assumption that states that something which trains the mind in this way is essential. That would be my warrant. Let's take a look at another one. Students benefit from having a liberal arts education. Several charter schools have built their curricula around this model and have seen higher graduation rates and better test scores. Yeah, this one's inductive reasoning. Because it relies on a certain observation, a specific observation, something that has happened or is currently happening, to back it up. The support is a specific observation, not a general principle. And the claim about all high schools providing a classical education, that is inferred from the observation of charter schools, which have done this with success. Okay? Let's look at another one. If there were a mandatory retirement age, companies would have fewer older employees, thus giving younger workers more opportunities to hold higher ranking positions. This is deductive. Yeah, this is deductive because there's no observable data. It relies on general principles. The support is a general principle, not a specific observation. The claim that younger workers would have more opportunities for advancement is supported by the premise that a mandatory retirement age would decrease the number of older employees. The underlying warrant here is that older employees generally have those high-ranking positions. So if both of those premises are true, then yes, my claim that younger workers would have more opportunities is in fact true. Let's try this. A mandatory retirement age could increase the economic burdens placed on nations that pay their retirees pensions, since forcing people to retire would increase the number of retirees. This one's also deductive. Again, there's no observable data. I'm relying on just general principles, principles of economics here. The support is that the support that I use to prove my claim is a general principle, not a specific observation. The claim that economic burdens would increase is supported by the premise that there would be more retirement-aged people to pay pensions to. The underlying assumption, of course, here is that more people seeking pensions leads to greater economic burden on the government because the government's paying those pensions. Then that doesn't need to be stated, but that's just the underlying warrant. Let's try a last one here. A mandatory retirement age could hurt a company's success. Some businesses in Europe tried implementing a mandatory retirement age and found that the loss of experience had a detrimental effect to everyday operations. This one's a little different. This is an inductive argument because it relies on that piece of observation. The support is a specific observation and not a general principle. It's something that has happened. The claim about mandatory retirement hurting success is inferred from this single observation of a certain business in Europe which has tried this unsuccessfully, or certain businesses in Europe. And we can reasonably assume that the claim is actually very reasonable. It says a mandatory retirement age could hurt a company's success. Well, yeah, we have examples to prove that, specific observations that prove that it in fact could hurt a company's success. So it's reasonable. Identifying reasoning. Let's go ahead and recap here. There are two basic methods of reasoning. You can use deductive reasoning or inductive reasoning. Deductive reasoning uses general principles or premises to validate a specific claim. Inductive reasoning uses specific observation. It draws on specific observation or specific evidence to infer a claim. So it's just using those inferencing skills. You're making a generalization based on what you see. All right, that's it for this tutorial video. Thanks again for watching, and good luck on your exam.